right, I've opened it. How do I see who's coming? Okay,
All right. I think we are at a moment in time where we could start. And from my side, a very, very warm welcome to our HDR and conversation. My name is Michael Roseman. I'm the director of QET's Center for Future Enterprise, and it's an absolute delight to have you all here in our this time virtual conversation. And this is a conversation, of course, that is about you, about PhD, about research, and about the tremendous privilege and opportunity it is to conduct a PhD right now or as a future intention. With a PhD, we conduct deep, in many cases, applied research to become a world leader in our space. But most of all, we try to produce new knowledge, new insights. And it's a privilege in many cases to be the very first one who can see what others can't see. And second, through our publications and our teaching, to distribute the knowledge that we have. With this, as I highlighted, I think we're in it for a treat today, and you should truly value, if you're current or future PhD student, the tremendous privilege and opportunity. Before I hand over to Diana for the introduction of today's guest speaker, of course, I would love to recognize the traditional owners of the land on which we're coming together, which means in the case of QET here at Gardens Point campus in the city of Brisbane, the Turrbal and Yuaga people, I'd like to pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. As indicated, you're in for a treat. We can see by you voting with your registrations the tremendous interest in our next speaker. And I'd like already now to express my gratefulness to Inger for joining us. And in order to give you the appropriate introduction to who will share her wisdom with you today, I would love to hand over to our PhD student, Diana, who will take care of you right now, but then also at the end of Inger's presentation. Please do enjoy the next hour of your life. Over to you, Diana. Diana, you're on mute.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's very nice to see so many people connected. My name is Diana Jimenez. I'm a PhD student at the Center for Future Enterprise. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this webinar, HDR in conversation with Professor Inger Mewburn, better known as the Physics Whisperer. She's professor and director of the research training at the Australian National University. I cannot be more excited to have Professor Inger with us. It's really a dream come true to me to meet her, at least virtually. I also have to say I'm very grateful for her great service to the research community, particularly to early career researchers. Her work has helped a lot of researchers navigate the academic world. In this webinar, Dr. Inger will share with us her research on the post-PhD job market. We hope this webinar can foster a vibrant and diverse online conversation around understanding the academic job market and the career opportunities in the industry. As HDR students and early career researchers, we are constantly wonder what real opportunities we have in and outside of the academic world. Please share your thoughts and questions in the Zoom in the Q&A function at any point during the webinar. And at the end, those questions are going to be answered. Thank you so much. Now I'll be hand over to the Dr. Inger. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Michael. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and I'm glad we could make it work. This new Zoom world makes these things much easier, and the moving chairs around and flying on airplanes. I'm zooming in today from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country here in beautiful Canberra. I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and to take a moment to acknowledge the long history of both knowledge work here on the Canberra lands and the many thousands of years that goes back. No one even knows, but everyone should respect a tradition that's so ancient. And also just take a moment to acknowledge this land is stolen and its sovereignty's never been ceded, and reconciliation myself is an ongoing issue and an ongoing piece of work that we all engage in. All right, so it's a pleasure to be here today. I will talk for about 30 minutes. There's plenty of time for questions, and please ask me anything. I've been studying this area since 2013. It's about all I've done with my research time. If I don't know the answer, I might be able to point you at a book or a resource where you can find out the answers to your questions. So I'm happy to field anything about that. All right. You'll have to stop sharing. Thank you. And I can share. Thank you. I will also send you this slide deck at the end of when I stop talking. Everything that looks like a link is a link. It's released under the Creative Commons Share Alike non-commercial attribution license, which means you can use it. You can use it in classrooms, you can use it in discussions, you can share it with other people. You can even remix it, but you just have to acknowledge where authorship came from. So it's here for you. It's constantly updated. I've had this slide deck up now for about 2.5 years. And as new information comes to hand, I update it. So it's always our latest data and latest report. So I'm presenting on behalf of my research team today. That's myself, Associate Professor Hannah Suleiman, and Associate Professor Will Grant. That's me. This is Hannah. She is a Professor of Machine Learning and Natural Language Processing. She's a very clever mathematician and a great colleague. Hannah oversaw and directed all the machine learning work on this project and worked on so many other aspects of it as well. This is what we call at ANU a cross-creek collaboration. ANU is spatially organised, so most of the sciences sit on one side of Sullivan's Creek and most of the humanities sit on the other side of Sullivan's Creek. And when you are collaborating between the humanities and the sciences, we call it a cross-creek. So this is a cross-creek collaboration. My colleague Will Grant also worked on this project. He's a sociologist by training, and he works in the Centre for Public Awareness of Science. Will and I did the coding and the annotation schema design for the machine learning parts of this presentation, and Hannah did oversaw that work technically and many other things beside. We're a very research-driven, research-forward outfit, even though we do have a commercial product that supports our work. We call the team Poststack. That's our business developer there, Lindsay, Chirath, Chen, and Ran, who are our very clever machine learning scientists. We try to release as much of our research out in the public as peer-reviewed papers as we can. It's actually very hard, as you no doubt know. Publication pipelines are a bit clogged and they take a long time. And we want to produce real-time snapshots. If we waited for them all to be published in a peer-reviewed journal, they'd be 2 years old by the time you see them. So we just keep this list updated. That was the report that we did at the start of the year. We just finished a new report this week, so I'll be updating it as soon as I finish this presentation. So that's why bookmarking this slide deck is a good idea and coming back to it and revisiting it. I will send you the link at the end. A couple of factors motivate this work, one of which is how downhearted and demoralised PhD students and early career researchers seem to be. I know some of you are master's students, maybe considering doing a PhD and maybe think, should I? There's not many academic jobs, and it seems like when I do get a job, I'm called overqualified. When I do finish my PhD, I'm called overqualified, and what's the point in it? And this word cloud I've had up and active since the start of the pandemic. A couple of hundred people have put words in it so far, and the same ones keep floating to the surface when people think about their career. Hopeless, anxious, uncertain, concerned, disappointed, those kind of words pop up. We get hopeful and optimistic, ambivalent, curious. Let's fair to say we have all the feelings about it. And there down on the right-hand corner, what's more concerning to me as an educator is that people seem to have a low sense of self-efficacy about the job market, whether there's a place for them, whether they'll be able to get that place, and whether they're well enough prepared for it. So we really want to give a bit of data-driven hope and tell you the size and the scope of the job market, and so we can help you make decisions about what to do next. Because the job market in academia is very precarious. So we can see here, it's sort of well summed up in this graph from an AMSI report in 2018. We can see this sort of linear growth of academic jobs, and it's growing slowly, absolutely not keeping pace with the size of the sector. So of course, universities are seeking to be more efficient, employ less staff, and have more casual staff and so on. Meanwhile, we've been pumping out PhDs at a higher and higher rate, and we end up having a big gap between the number of graduated PhDs and available positions. So that gap between here and here is the precarious job market that no doubt led to over 50 of you coming along today to see maybe what your other options are or just how precarious it is. But we can see this is a problem of very long standing here, where the crossover point is about 1995, 1996. So this has been with us for a long time and does contribute to a lot of the what we call in social science discourse, just the chatter about the PhD, its value, whether it's worthwhile, which gets mixed in with other conversations about mental health and so on, and generally represents a bad picture of the degree, when actually, as Michael said, and I really appreciate him saying that, it is a pleasure and a privilege to do a PhD, but we are doing it sometimes under exceptionally difficult circumstances, taking massive hits in income on stipends that are way below the poverty line. And so these all contribute to a massive anxiety, and that's perfectly legitimate. And it means also that it's very ordinary to leave your PhD at the end. So 50% of people, based on exit surveys, leave when they finish their PhD. You see that purple segment there, it goes to industry, broadly defined. I'll talk about what that looks like soon. Also government, big consumer of PhD graduates. Not-for-profit organisations, there might be things like research think tanks, and high schools. If you've got a passion for teaching, high school might be the place to scratch that itch and provide more job security and certainty than academia. When we look on the other half of people who stay, 20% of Australian PhD students leave. They might be going back to their home country or just seeking employment elsewhere. 30% stay. Of that light blue quadrant, the 30% of people who stay in academia after they graduate looking for an academic career, 75% of those people are experiencing precarity. That means that they've got short-term contracts, either 3 months to 3 years, or they're working casual work semester to semester. This is a very large portion of the workforce. Some estimate that it's around 10,000 people. Some estimate that it's more. Universities don't count it very well, and it's terribly difficult. And I experienced this myself. I did it for 13 years to get a mortgage, to settle down, to find any sort of through line in your career. And some people are casual academics for their entire career. So I have friends now that have been doing it for 25 years. This is a new thing. I'm 50 now, one of the first generations to experience this precarity. And so my colleagues and peers, there are some of us who are still doing it 25 years later. The picture is the same in other countries, just briefly detouring here into the UK. And the interesting thing about the way the UK have done their data is they've split it up by different disciplines here: arts, humanities, biological sciences, physical engineering. And you can see there's a really big difference between research, people employed as researchers, people employed as teachers, and what other occupations that they occupy. So we can see down here, I think the key takeaway here is 19% end up in that broadly considered idea of industry. And when I've looked at breakdowns of other figures from universities, it seems like it sits around 20% of people that end up somewhere that isn't a sort of recognisable education institution or a clinical workplace like a hospital. Hospitals have a good relationship with academia, and there's a bit more slippage between hospitals and universities. When you look at the census data, we can see that quite a few people identify as a researcher outside of academia. And so we're really interested, my team and I, in where are the jobs in this grey area industry and this orange area government. We're not interested in who's got jobs at the moment or where people have gone. Other people do that research. So some people have done it through the quilt data that's collected by the universities at 6 months out, which I just showed you. And then it's also collected by studying LinkedIn and also sometimes just even following people up. The Trace project in Canada is a good example of just actually Google stalking people and following to see where they go. That's one way of looking at the job market. The other way is to look at the potential of it. What are the jobs that are good for PhD graduates that involve a lot of PhD skills like data analysis and making new knowledge, but they don't necessarily say PhD in them, or they aren't necessarily jobs that you might think of as being a research destination. There might not be many people with a PhD in those areas yet, and yet the work itself is quite suitable. So we use job ad text, and job ads are interesting because they're kind of like a wish list for a person who probably doesn't exist, and to be able to find out what that employer wants, what are their needs and desires. And so we collect these job ads, we analyze and sort them using machine learning, and then we produce insights. So the first step in this is recognizing that a lot of jobs that mention research skills and research capabilities as the key thing that the job does do not say PhD inside them. In fact, 80% of the jobs that we've found when we put our algorithm over a large data set, for instance, every job in Seek in 2015, we found that 80% of the jobs that are really asking for a researcher or a person with research skills do not say PhD anywhere in the ad. Some of them do say master's degrees. It seems like a much more recognizable degree than a PhD, but a lot of them don't say PhD. And what we have then is a large but hidden job market for PhD talent. It's worthwhile to reflect on the notion that there's a very few PhD graduates in Australia. It's about 0.05% of the population. So employers don't think to put it in, possibly when we've talked to employers about the reasons why they don't. One of the reasons they give us is that they don't want to restrict the job to only PhD because you're such a small cohort. And if we put a really high bar degree requirement in there, goes the thinking, then we won't get applications from people with master's degrees or people with lots of experience. So it's important to acknowledge that not all these jobs need a PhD, obviously, but they're a good fit for someone who wants to use their PhD skills outside academia. So we designed an algorithm. It took us 2 years. It was really hard. I can't tell you exactly what's in it because it's a trade secret, but suffice to say, we just modeled an ideal research graduate. And then we coded thousands and thousands of job ad text using intercoder agreement methods devised by machine learning scientists. That was me and Will. That was our job. And eventually we taught the machine to be able to replicate the way that we analysed a job ad, which means that we can rank all the job ads on a scale between 0 and 10. And we draw a cutoff line there at about 7. And we say everything under that distribution curve, every job that sits there, that is a PhD shaped job or a nerdy job. And we call this this scaling index the nerdiness index. So that's sort of how it works conceptually. When we run the algorithm across different job parts of the job market, we see different patterns. So this is manufacturing, transport and logistics. It's my favorite graph. From seek.com in 2015. You can see the nerdiness index goes from 0, no research skills required, to 10, super nerdy. And we've got a cutoff point here at 7. And we can see a distribution curve of different types of work along here. Truck drivers don't need a PhD. Office personnel and technicians overwhelmingly don't need a PhD. They might be consumers of research, but they're not producers. And the jobs that come over our threshold are producers of research. And in manufacturing, transport and logistics, it's things like robotics, AI, 3D printing, and so on. These jobs will be different in every industry, but they're the high-end knowledge work. Think about Amazon. They used to have factories full of people. Now they're full of robots. And you still need people to design the robots, maintain the robots, etc. I saw recently a drone footage flying through the Gigafactory for Tesla in Berlin, and it flew through and across all the production lines. There were no people there. There were just big machines doing this. But there were people, when you saw them standing around screens, watching the performance of the machines. And so that's the kind of work we're talking about here, especially in Australia and New Zealand, high-end additive manufacturing and so on. They're rare, these jobs. So this is 2017 data, and this is the sort of distribution curve from that set. There were 1.4 million jobs-ish in this set. Of those, 64,000 research-intensive jobs. They're like needles in a haystack, really. And what we're trying to do is grab all the needles out of all the different haystacks and put them in one haystack. I know it's a bad image. It's the only one I've got at the moment, but you get the sense that these are rare jobs, and putting them all together can show us, create a picture for us of what the research market looks like. And 2017 data, again, hasn't changed markedly since then, although there's been some shifts, but it's good enough for government work, as they say. Government is a huge consumer, potentially, of PhD graduates. If we add up central government administration and public administration, ends up being quite a big slice of the pie, followed by banking. And we do hear anecdotally lots of stories of physicists and computational biologists going into banks and earning big bucks because they're dealing with very complex, messy data sets. Hospitals, as I've said, always have had a good relationship with academia, engineering, computers, accounting, and so on. And you might be at this point saying, Inga, there's something wrong with your algorithm because scientific research services is so small. And I say it's small because the industry is small in Australia. The biggest employer of Australians is retail, and supermarket and grocery stores get a look in here at number 20. So there's still research intensive jobs in that industry. For instance, looking at how people shop, making user maps and journeys, space optimization, and analysing the masses of data that come from online shopping. But when you change your view and you say, instead of showing me the total number of jobs, show me proportionally, what are the nerdiest industries? And we can see here, scientific research services stops being small and starts being the biggest one. You can imagine how relieved I was when this graph popped out, followed by some interesting industries: software publishing, that's your Microsofts; data processing, web hosting, that's your Googles; non-store retailing, that's your Amazons; internet publishing, broadcasting, that's your Netflix. And if you think about the pandemic, these industries have been very resilient. And so, in fact, we saw a doubling of demand for research workers in non-store retailing through the process of the pandemic. And it probably does go some way to accounting for the incredibly buoyant market that we're seeing for research-oriented jobs. So there's the figures for supermarkets there. You can see it's nearly doubled. All right, so what did COVID do? So the pandemic made a huge impact. And as I said, job ads like wish lists, but they're also like canaries in the coal mine. They're the first thing to go down when the economy suffers a shock. So the economy really froze around March and April when the first lockdown happened. There was a lot of uncertainty. Jobs that were on the market got pulled off. No new jobs got added. People didn't know how to onboard people. And we had this sharp, sudden decline. Everything just stopped. And it's marked in every country around the world. In every data set, you see this COVID cliff. It was relatively short-lived though, and we can see there's the cliff and then there's the climb out. And you can see here, I think Queensland did moderately well, and that's because you had pretty good disease control. You really could see this sort of dip here in New South Wales when they, or is that Victoria? Let me just see. I've got my thing. Yeah, New South Wales, when they had Delta lockdowns declared and they went into their hard lockdown period. So disease control and employment have been linked for a while. I think our politicians would like to think they're unlinked now. I don't think that's the case. I think lockdowns or people not going out does really affect how quickly work is transacted, but we'll see. But it's very interesting to see job ads. It's a much more real-time indicator than unemployment rates. It takes a while for unemployment to become a problem. And in fact, employment seems to be at unemployment is the 50-year low at the moment. Here's what the picture looks like at the moment. So we've got academic jobs on the left and non-academic jobs on the right. Obviously, in order to tell you the non-academic job market, I have to clean out the academic jobs. And we've developed quite a sophisticated filter for them so we can get a bit more of a handle on the academic job market. But you can see academic jobs dropped like everything else. But controversially, they were back right up to where they started from by the start of 2021. Universities at the same time were telling us that they didn't have any money and everything was terrible. But what we really did see in this data is the universities taking the opportunity to reshape their workforce. And it seems to us seeing the increasing precarity, which we predicted when this started, and it actually seems to have come to pass, is that more jobs are offered at a lower level and with more short-term contracts. And we're also seeing some volatility here, some sort of seesawing up and down. It'll be interesting to see how that rolls out, but it could be just the university still trying to adjust to the post-pandemic flow of students and so on. What we saw really was full-time professors like myself taking retirement or early retirement and being replaced with like a level B on a one-year contract. So I don't think the pandemic's been very good for academia, and I don't think I'm telling you anything new there. On the other hand, non-academic jobs have gone great guns. So we can see here some baseline data, the COVID cliff, the climb out, and then a massive overshoot. Late last year, Morrison was talking about how hot the economy was. He was kind of right, at least in terms of jobs, maybe not the pay of the jobs, but we hit this massive and sudden dramatic shock. And that, we tend to see drops off at Christmas time, but I think that was a combination of that second lockdown and Omicron. But since then, it's bounced back, and it'll be interesting to see what it looks like at the end of this year. You can see also the orders of magnitude here in how many there are each month versus in academia. So obviously the non-academic job market is very large and accessible. New Zealand looks interesting, quite a different picture from ours, especially around their academic job market and much smaller numbers. The UK, we saw a double drop off. So we started off here with a drop off with Brexit and then a drop off with COVID. So each country is experiencing different things when it comes to its job market, obviously. Now, because we had to clean out the academic jobs, I spent a large part of 2020 coding academic jobs by field of research code. And that involved an awful lot of consulting in Wikipedia with trying to work out what jobs fell into which basket. And we do have a fairly sort of hefty unsure here. But it's an interesting snapshot of where we think each discipline job is at. So this is 2019 data, and we can see health sciences and biological sciences have a lot of jobs compared to poor old philosophy and religious studies, which is in a good year, philosophy and religious studies got 24 jobs, and in a bad year, which was 2020, it got 6. So we saw a dip in philosophy, but we didn't see as big a dip or as pronounced a dip in biological health sciences. Why are these the millionaires of the academic world? It's because of research funding. I think 90% of our research funding comes from government, and their priorities have been around health and have been for a long time. But you can see that the jobs that are available in philosophy tend to be full-time jobs. So whereas the jobs that are available in biomedical and clinical sciences tend to be postdocs jobs. So most of you are in business, and you can find yourself on here. Where am I? Some of business sits in information and computer science. But most of it would sit here in management, tourism and services. So it's decent. And then you can look over here for the latest sort of trend data. So I think it's useful thinking about academia to sort of know what kind of market you're entering. So when I send you this slide deck, you can have a closer look. I said half an hour, I'm just about on target. What's next? Pretty much uncertainty is what's next. Who even knows? It feels like nothing will ever be normal again. I think I finally accepted that in my heart and soul, maybe only last week. That we'll be living with COVID in this kind of really quite precarious way for at least quite some time, maybe, years more before we can sort of background that anxiety a bit. So it's going to be with us for a while. And then, of course, we've got climate change. I don't need to tell you, you're in Queensland, about the devastating effects of that and what that does to our economy. There's a lot of uncertainty around. So the only thing we can do is really plan for uncertainty. In that case, we need to look to what agency do we have? What kind of addressable market have we got for our skills and talent? How can we best prepare ourselves? Your skills are transferable. We talk about this a lot. So academic employers and non-academic employers, we get some skills coding come through with our data feed from MZ Burning Glass. And it shows that non-academic employers and academic employers are basically looking for the same things. People who can work with others, who can work autonomously, who can solve problems. The difference mainly is lecturing and teaching there versus project management, but academic employers say project management is number 6, so they're not that different. I would really highlight to you though, that communication skills doesn't mean the same thing in every place. In academia, good communication skills are like I'm doing now, giving a lecture, that's a communication skill. Writing an academic paper is a communication skill. Maybe working on a committee and talking and listening to your colleagues and coming up with solutions, that might be a communication skill. In a non-academic workplace, if I gave someone an academic paper to try and communicate something I'd found out, that wouldn't work terribly well with it, would it? So good communication in one area is not the same as good communication in another. You do have good communication skills, like your ability to write, but you need to be agile and change those skills. It's like translating them into a different language. And then becomes the issue of trying to sell to the employer that you can do that. If you haven't got any evidence that you can write other than as research papers, they're probably not going to believe you that you can write policy briefs and so on. So even though your skills are transferable, the extent to which is going to vary a lot depending on the circumstances and how much it changes, and how able you are to deal with that change is going to vary. Just know it changes and know that you have to be attentive to that, and that workplace cultures count for a lot. We do index all these jobs in our search engine Postdoc. We have talked to QUT, they are not yet a subscriber, but what is in our database is Australia, New Zealand jobs. We're just about to add the UK, and then we're working to add the US after that. So if you're interested in the product brochure is there. Basically how it works is you can type in anything related to the job you want, and you can search either the archive or the current jobs. It shows it's geared really to give you a result no matter how weird your searching strategy is. So it's built for PhD candidates who sometimes have very unusual types of search strategies and things that they're interested in. When you have a look at each job, you can see the skill sets from the job ad text. You can go out and apply for the job if you're looking in the current database, or you can tell it to find jobs similar to that. We use machine learning, natural language processing tools inside the database. So what the machine will do is it will look at the job ad that you've selected, and it will match semantically the other jobs that look and resemble the previous job. Now, the key thing to understand about machine learning, and this goes for everything I've said, is that it's not a keyword search. It's semantic. So the same word may be expressed, the meaning may be expressed in lots of different words or clusters of words. What the machine does is see the equivalence. So it reads things like humans do. So it might find another job that actually has almost no words in common, but the intent is very similar. We also just really try and encourage you to think about what's your imagined possible future self. You've probably imagined yourself as some kind of academic. And by searching and looking for other jobs that ask for those same sorts of skills, but it parlayed in different ways, you start to ask the question, who else could I be? That's the accessing Postdoc, and you can have a look at that. If you happen to be have an affiliation with another institution, you can try and log in with your institutional email address. I can't tell you who subscribes. There's 7 universities who subscribe to it. You can log in with your institutional address and have a go. All right, but if you don't have Postdoc, what can you do? You can buy this book. Here it is. It's $2.99 a digital copy. Look how thin. It's really a pamphlet. It's about $10 the paper copy. I like the paper copy. I give them out to students. You can read that in 2 copies. It's written by a PhD graduate whose job it was to hire PhD graduates into pharmaceutical companies. Basically, she's seen every mistake people make and tells you how not to make those mistakes. So it's brilliant and concise. If you're really still thinking about it and you're sort of like, where am I? How do I feel about it? This book is probably for you. The advice it gives is pretty much similar to this one. But this guy did his PhD in ancient Roman poetry, and he converted to working outside academia, and he charts his journey, lots of tips and techniques. It really meets you where you are on whatever emotional journey you're having about it. And I just highly recommend it. There's a review there, linked through to Thesis Whisperer. There's a SoundCloud interview with him as well, if you can't be bothered reading the book. He says a lot of what he says in the book, but the book is better. I like this book by Cal Newport. I don't like all of his work, but this one's quite useful. It's a way of conceptualizing and thinking about job markets and thinking about what skills you have to offer them and how you can sell that better, because it really is kind of a sales job at this level. And I'll also add that other people can help you with that sales job. So what else should you do? I think it's always good to talk to people who've walked the path. Who's doing the adjacent possible career already? Do you know those people? Can you find them in LinkedIn? What can you learn from their journey by talking to them? You've done a good thing today by coming along and doing something that's not writing training. We can fill workshop after workshop, and I teach writing, so I can easily fill lots of workshops full of writing, but less people come to workshops on, say, presenting. We have some workshops on freelancing. We at ANU, we have them on stakeholder engagement skills, all the things we see in these job ads. Hard to get people to come to them. But so give that priority. Stop thinking so much about writing academic papers. If academia isn't in your future, then spend your time doing other things. And also the Career Centre, incredibly helpful, and you've got a great one at QUT, and they really know their stuff. Okay. You can register your interest in Postac there, and you can also read the manual to see more about what it does. And there's a few more books and resources to follow up at the end of this slide deck. I'm just going to share it now with you in the chat. I'm assuming everyone can see the chat, Diana, and invite you. Yes, you can all see that. There's the slide deck, and invite any questions that you've got. Like I say, ask me anything. All right, that was about half an hour, maybe a little more. All right, happy to take questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Inger. This was amazing. Great data set, great insights, and we do have heaps of questions coming through.
Oh, great.
I will have moderate the Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
We have got a question about pay. Which industry would pay better? Would you be better off in an academia to stay in academia after your PhD, or would an industry pay better?
Industry pays better. There's no pattern to the pay versus the nerdiness that we can see. So the top ranked most nerdy job, I was looking at it the other day, was 270,000, and the next ranked one was 90,000. So the pay varies dramatically, and it doesn't seem connected to nerdiness. But I do know that there's more permanent full-time work out there, which means that it will pay better. And a level B salary is about 79,000, and most jobs will pay more than that we index. Majority of jobs will pay more than that.
Awesome. Another question coming through is on if you can give us any tips on someone deciding between academia and industry, any tips that would help them make a better decision, either to stay in academia or to move on to industry?
I think that size of the academic market's really important. So, you're business people, so I can say terms like addressable market. You know, what's the addressable market for your skills? If it's limited, and it's limited in this country and it's bigger in another country, maybe thinking about going overseas for opportunity is worthwhile. If it's kind of a large market, maybe it's worth sticking around for a while and seeing if you can make it work. I always think it's good. My friend Sherry Walsh, who used to be one of the Queensland QUT careers counsellors, hence I know you've got good ones. I see Karen's in the chat, who's also excellent. She would always say, what's your terms of engagement? How long are you going to give academia to work out? And what are you going to count as progress? And are you making progress or not? And check in with yourself. So it's worth, no pathway or doorway is ever entirely closed. And sometimes you just got to work it out by walking a bit of the path and seeing how you're going. I call this kicking the can down the road. You know, you kick it this way and you come up and you still got the can there, and you kick it down the other way, and you constantly check in and revisit, is this the right direction for me, for my family, for my well-being? And I've been kicking the can down the road now for 25 years in academia, and it's been okay, but your mileage may vary considerably on that. And it's a different place. Even I started really seriously trying to enter academia in 2001. I didn't get my first permanent academic job until 2009. Then I left it almost immediately, and I've had on contracts, and ANU didn't make me permanent till 2019. So there's a lot of contingent casual work in academia, and how long you can put up with that is really an individual circumstance. And I'm also not going to deny that some people are more privileged than others. I have white privilege. I also have cis het married woman privilege. So there's large periods of my life where my husband did kind of bankroll my academic job. We couldn't have afforded it if he'd had a less well-paying job. So everyone's circumstances are going to be really different, which is why it's really good to go and talk to a careers counsellor like Karen, and also go and talk to the counselling centre. Give it some space to have some feelings about it. You don't have to crowd your partner or your friends with those feelings. Someone who is maybe not as emotionally attached or doesn't have as much kind of skin in the game about what your choices are can be really helpful too. So that's probably my tips. Good
Wonderful.
question.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Inger. Another question is on the post-COVID market. At the moment, there's so much happening, and the universities are adopting, changing their business models, adopting new models, might be different in recruiting academics. What's the future like? Can you predict what it's going to be like in the future, in the next 6 months? How difficult or easy is it going to be to have academia jobs?
I think the changing government makes it really difficult to make any predictions. If we'd still had the last government that we had, I'd say it was dire. This government's really hard to say. We're so dependent on government funding. I do know one thing, two things about the different flavours of government. I've lived through both. We get insulted a bit more by the coalition, like they don't respect or really give academia much kind of love. Labor don't tend to do that, so that's kind of nice on one level. The other thing is Labor cares a lot more about equity in undergraduate education, I think, than the coalition does. But both Labor and the coalition, I think, have very similar policies around research. Both of them have very similar policies around the academic workforce. We've got a union in the mix, the NTEU, so we're highly unionised, but unions have had been nobbled for a long time as a source of power, so that may shift under Labor. I think there's too many plates in the air, but my gut feel is that Labor will not throw heaps more money at research, and Labor will keep pursuing the same strategy of industry collaboration and trying to turn universities into an economic part of the economy and a lever that they can push. And I've never seen the two of them really deviate on that. The rhetoric around it changes, but the systems of measurement change, but the intent seems to be similar. I went to a presentation by someone from the Department of Education on Tuesday, and even he was pretty much saying that. He's like, we still don't know what the new government wants, but more of the same, really. Maybe some more money. So academia is recovering. Its student numbers are climbing up. The amount of jobs is going to depend on two things, you know, how many students we've got and how much research funding. So the student piece might go up. Also, Labor might do some things that mean that we can increase the number of students and they won't be so capped, and in which case there'll be more jobs. And research funding, I would imagine in the short term will stay fairly flat. So I don't think it's going to get worse. Sorry, that's a very long involved answer. I don't think it'll be worse. but
Yeah.
I'm not convinced it's going to be way radically better.
Yes. All right. Another one. We've got one of our participants asking if they have been landing lots of interviews, but they're not able to get the job. Is there anything that you could give a tip on to sell yourself better?
Well, I could, but you could go and see Karen, who's in the chat there, and go and make an appointment with her. She's an expert. And I think these are very individual conversations and about the narrative that you're telling about yourself, about the experience that you have and how you talk about your experience. So I couldn't really give you really good advice in this kind of setting, whereas Karen really can, and it's free. But also I would definitely read this one. It's just so practical. It's basically, this is what you do. It's step by step. But it's a good chance for me to just mention that there are barriers there, and employer perception is a big one. We have talked to recruiters, so we've taken jobs that we think are PhD shaped jobs, good for researchers, and we've gone back to the person who put it up, the hiring manager, and said, why didn't you put PhD in here? And as I said, one of the reasons they gave us was, we don't want to limit the market. But the other reasons they gave us were quite interesting. They'd say, well, academia, does it really count as experience? Really, it's a different planet. It's an alternate dimension. It's another world. They always use these sci-fi metaphors to talk about academia. So even though you'd done the same thing, because you'd done it in academia, they weren't convinced you could do it outside. So that was one thing. We also noticed that they thought that PhD students tended to approach the job market like it was sloppy seconds, and that they'd bounce and go back to academia the first chance they got. So they sensed there was a lack of commitment. And then the biggest thing is just that sense of overqualified. I find it very frustrating and weird how that overqualified tag gets parlayed onto research graduates. So it seems to be a way of like, well, you've shown so much obsessive interest in this one thing. Why aren't you just doing that? Why are you over here? You couldn't really be serious about over here because you're really interested in that. Also, they assume that, so for instance, skills like writing, they assume that you can only do one kind of writing, and that you aren't actually more flexible in the kind of writing you can do. So there are significant barriers from the employer side. I don't want to understate that. Some people do leave their PhD off their resume and claim they get better success in getting shortlisted and have better conversations. As you can imagine, I'm a referee for quite a lot of people. And when I get calls from employers and they say, oh, I'm just worried they're overqualified, I say, why wouldn't you want that? Like, don't you want someone you can say, go do this hard thing and bring it back to me in 3 months, and then not really think about it in between, and they come back with something awesome? Like, don't you want that? And then the employer goes, oh, I kind of do. And then I'm like, don't you want someone who learns really fast with minimal instruction and can, make autonomous decisions? They're like, yeah, I really want that. And so I think it's sort of understanding that your skill set there is learning really fast, reading really fast, doing hard things, not being scared by numbers, and learning to sell your skill set a little bit more simply, maybe than zeroing in on the very particular things you can do. And this is just good advice for any job hunting. It's what can you do for them? That's the mindset that you've got to take into a job interview. Don't go there like you're going to an exam and you're getting examined by a teacher. What is it that you bring to the table for them? And this is where someone like Karen can really help you out. Thank you for being you, Karen. Yes.
Awesome.
There's your email address.
Another one, Inger, how, in your opinion, would you rate the industry academia collaborative postdoc experience? Would it be like being a master of none, or how would you compare the academic versus compare with the collaborative postdoc positions?
Collaborating with industry is the future. More and more of it. People don't put their hands up for it to the same extent that they put their hands up for pure research. Therefore, I think anyone with those skill set, again, it's an addressable market thing. There's going to be a strong and growing demand for people who can work across that boundary. And I would say just get on it, and especially as a person who's got a startup. Well, we're not really a startup. We're a not-for-profit sitting inside a university, which is a bit of a different thing, but we've still got those commercial pressures. So I would say just do what other people are not doing is usually worked for me. So yeah, it's the future. They're not going to stop asking us to do that kind of thing in the short term at all. I don't know what the experience is like. I really can't speak to it. It seems to vary as much as any experience anywhere does. It's so contingent on the person, the project, and the management and all those kind of things. To say anything generic about it is pretty difficult.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Inger. One last question before we can start wrapping up. You mentioned COVID-19, Brexit. Were there any contextual considerations that the team considered in the modeling? What influences were seen from these factors?
Oh, well, so we don't know. We're only making an assumption about Brexit. Our modelling is only within the algorithm itself. We've modelled an ideal PhD student, and then we see whether that's embodied in the job ad, and then we count as many job ads as we see in suggest that sort of person is the answer to the job. So then we just look at really the pattern, and then have a look at the timing of where we're getting those peaks and troughs. Christmas obviously being one. It always gets a bit quiet in Christmas or major holidays, depending on the country, I would guess, but UK and Australia and New Zealand, it's Christmas. And then we can only account for that double dip. And it looks like going further back that it was very steady, and then bang, immediately after Brexit, and then bang, a COVID, but it seems to have recovered from COVID, but not to the pre-Brexit levels. So we have a model. We're not economists. We don't operate with more market forces than that. Really happy to entertain the idea that there's other forces at work there, but Brexit seems the most obvious one. I noticed Michelle Smid here in the chat. Thanks for the feedback in the chat here. She says, I noticed that some organisations, especially software organisations, are hiring PhDs into graduate roles. However, do you have any tips to get into non-graduate, more senior roles, especially if you have several years of research experience? Other non-graduate positions looking for certain skills and experience. I think this is an issue that I've counselled many a PhD graduate here at ANU through into graduate programs, because they're very popular in government here, as you can imagine. And like naturally, you feel your skills are not like an undergraduate. You're bringing a whole lot of different things to the table, but employers really may not see that's the case. So you may want to skip the graduate program part and say, well, I think I'm worth more pay and experience than that, but they just might not buy it. So it might be worth doing a year or two just to prove that you can translate those skills. What I have noticed is that people who I just advise people when they're doing this change is to go in low and you'll end up high. So if you go in slightly lower and you can get in there, what I've noticed is people get promoted very rapidly. So it's a foot in the door proposition. So look, if you can apply for those jobs that are a bit more experienced, demonstrate that you've got the experience in translating your skills outside academia. So that could be, I don't know, even in volunteer settings. I know my son's a psychology student. He's done a lot of data analysis for the Greens political party. He's a member. So, you know, he uses that sometimes in job hunting to talk about his skill sets. So it doesn't necessarily have to be paid employment that you can demonstrate, but you need to be able to tell a story that you've translated that skill and demonstrated it in another context in order to really be above a graduate level. Otherwise, you will be treated like a graduate. And there's also the issue, of course, of people management and team management, and our mileage varies a lot on that. But a lot of our ECRs and our early career researchers actually have significant management experience that they need to be able to explain. That's the other thing that's frustrating about employers, is they see a postdoc as kind of the same as a doctorate in lots of cases. So because it says postdoc, they assume it's more education, that it's not actually a job. So just be careful of the language that you use to describe post-PhD employment, research assistant, postdoc. They're often assumed to be actually still studying by people who haven't got much knowledge of the education sector. Again, if you're going into an industry that's used to employing graduates and PhD graduates, they'll know, but other industries won't. Natasha's asking, you've done lots of interesting work identifying skills that PhDs do have. Have you been able to see a possible weakness in PhDs? I wouldn't call it a weakness so much as that you're highly evolved for a particular type of culture, and that you need to understand that that leads to you doing things in a certain way. I'll give you an example. A lot of employers and recruiters, for that matter, that I've spoken to describe PhD students as aggressive. And so I sat with this for a while because I don't experience you as aggressive at all. But it took me a while to realize what they were really talking about. If you go to any sort of research presentation, the questioning will be quite blunt and to the point, and we will be skeptical, and we need to be convinced. That kind of attitude taken into a meeting, say where my husband works, can be read as aggressive. Because the standards that we have for truth and robustness are very high, and they don't actually hold everywhere. And so behaviour in one space that works in one space won't work in another. Another example, we're great project managers, but we always run over time in academia. Never do you have an edited book with everyone handing their chapter in on time, ever, okay? So we are good project managers. The thing is that our projects are full of risk. Risky projects change, their outcomes change, their deliverables are hard to predict. There's constant change of direction. When you find out something that means that deliverable is no longer possible, you have to pivot, as they say in industry, a lot. So what we see in our project management is a real agility and a management of risk. And with that becomes like long timelines usually to finish a project. In industry, the project might be wanting to be done in 3 months that we would consider a PhD. I was talking to a person very high up in Deloitte a couple of years ago about this. And he said to me, oh, I went to the university and I wanted this, this and this done. I'm like, okay. And he said, and they said it would take a year. And I was like, that's ridiculous. It would take me 3 months. I'm like, consider these people also are doing all their own admin, they're teaching, they're doing this, you know, a day a week. This is not like a full-time job for them. You can't sort of, and your deliverables are very clear. And that means that cuts out a whole lot of avenues of exploration. And so you know what you want to get to, whereas they want to pursue those avenues of exploration and make sure they've got the right solution. So you're coming at project management very, very differently. So, you know, I would say if there's a weakness, it's not so much a weakness as an adaptation that we've got to academia, and we train you too well. And then it's like the fish doesn't notice the water that it's in, or the bird won't fly out of the cage when the door is open. We get so used to and habituated to how academia is as a culture that this can get in our way sometimes. So just something to think about. Thanks, Michelle. Weaknesses are strengths. Yes, absolutely. It's the dark side. Yes, scope in industries tends to be wide but shallow. Yes, and their standards of truth and their standards of finish will be different in many cases. And your level of creativity and autonomy over deciding what direction to do the research and what counts as a deliverable will probably be less. So there's lots of considerations there. And this is why, you know, making the decision whether it's something you really want, it has to be a careful one and done with, you know, good advice. And hopefully we've been able to give you information. Information isn't advice. You need to take that information and really think about what it means for you. So hopefully, even though I've only had a short time to answer questions, there's some leads there.
This has been amazing. Thank you so much, Inger. I'm conscious of the time. I'll hand over to Diana.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you so much for the time and to speak to our community. We are very grateful for the time and effort that you took to share with us your thoughts and experiences. Well, we hope you will be able to join us and again at future events, and why not come and visit us here in Brisbane.
Yeah, one time I'd love to.
Yeah. And thank you
great.
so much for all our participants. Judging for the questions, I think this topic was interesting for many people here. And of course, these tell us that these kind of events are very successful to make them in the future. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Inga. Very
Thank
much
you so much.
appreciate your time.
Absolute
Thanks,
pleasure.
everyone, for joining us. And yeah, stay connected with us.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Darren, I want to wait for everyone to leave. So, how was it?
I think it was good. Thanks. Yeah, everything was. She just.
I
She
was
was really
so,
quick.
I was so nervous with the questions. I don't know if I made sense or if I did it nicely or anything. I don't know.
Oh, you did it really well. Excellent. Perfect.
I was
Yeah.
trying to not make
Mhm.
it look I'm reading completely, but then I was trying to process it and ask on my own. Like I'm asking, but it was so hard to do it quickly.
No, but it sounds really good. It didn't sound at all reading. No, no. And the last questions is Karen Kabuda. She say, "Are you able to provide my contact details for any HDR meeting, QT career advice?" Can you see that?
Yeah.
Amy?
So Karen Kavu is from
Yeah, from QUT
yeah.
career advice from QUT.